teach my students, dental students, not residents. Also, this is what I use in my practice 90% of the time. Now, Martin will talk about BT race, which are 3 files. He uses that in his practice most of the time, so that's why we do it, and we're going to segment it so you guys really have an understanding of each system. We have plenty of time where we'll do each system on blocks, on teeth, and things like that. Again, it depends on what your comfort level is. BT race is a little more challenging because that 35 no taper file, you sort of have to know how to use that thing. Otherwise, it can be complicated, so it's a little hard to teach. Again, that's why I don't teach it to my dental students. Again, novices have a little trouble picking up on that. You guys, I think, will pick it up pretty easily because you have some experience. But again, BT race, I will talk about BioRace today. Some of this is going to be a little redundant, what he talked about taper and things, but I want to make sure you understand taper. That's really important. It's taken me the last 5 years to sort of figure out flexibility, taper, da-da-da-da-da. So, again, you've seen this before. We don't compromise on apical size right now. So 35, probably a minimum. Once some of these newer instruments come out, we may be able to use smaller sizes, but we're going to might use that XP finisher to help us clean canals. So we're still trying to conserve tooth structure, but right now, as of right now, Tuesday, we're still advocating large apical sizes. And you saw sort of the pictures of canal sizes and things like that. So again, a size 25 looks fantastic on a radiograph. But is it enough in a buccal lingual direction to really clean, debride, scale a canal? We talked about biofilms yesterday. So that's the rationale for these large apical sizes. And again, staying centered in the tooth is important. This system does that to the most extent. It doesn't transport canals very much. So again, it's a safe way to treat these at large apical sizes. Smaller taper, more flexibility. So again, I showed you the one case where I may not use a 3504. I might use a 3502 or a 35 parallel if I have a severe curve. So we have to think about what we're doing sort of one step ahead like chest. I don't want to stick a 3504 taper in a severely curved canal because what's going to happen to it? Probably separate. So again, understanding taper and sizes I think is real important. Smaller taper, we still haven't changed our apical size. Smaller taper, our file's more flexible now, right? Even smaller taper, more flexible. Not going to discuss a lot of this, but again, the larger the taper, the stiffer the file. I used to think rotary, when rotary came out, I love Pro Taper. Nice big wide file, it's never going to break. But again, it's not flexible either. So what Pro Taper tip size? What's the F1 finisher tip size? Is maybe a 30, right? 25 or 30. Is that an appropriate apical size? Probably not. Again, just another graph to show you these sort of different files, how flexible they are. Twisted files, that's a Cybron product, right? BioRace or race files. Again, this is sort of the metallurgy, how files are made. Those of us that are old enough, Profile, the old Profile files, very poor cutters, very inefficient files. You sort of had to press on them, step on them, use a lot of force, run at 3,000 or 300 RPM. Again, not a very efficient file. That's the file I started off when rotaries came into fashion. Still on the market, I think. People will use that in their systems, but not a very efficient cutter. Pro Taper, race files, very sharp, very efficient. You heard him mention yesterday a little bit about high-speed cutting. That's what we're looking for, 600 RPM, which is a high-speed cut, surgical cut, very efficient things. And you'll get a feel for that when we start working, on the hands-on part of this. They're very efficient files. I will talk about how we hold handpieces. the handpiece should almost fall out of your hand when we're doing this technique. Your little finger should be guiding the file, and the file should be doing all the work. A few slides from now, you can use the BioErase files 4 times. So if you're doing 4 molars with 4 canals, then you can do 16 canals if you want. That's been proven to be pretty safe before you start separating files. When you start doing enough endodontics, after 2 uses, you'll notice they become dull. Sterilization, use sodium hypochlorite dulls these things. In my practice, in the school, we use them twice. And then we send them to the sim lab for demonstration and hands-on and things like that. Certainly, you can use these more than once. But again, the efficiency goes way down after 2 times. Again, when you do enough of these, the second time you'll notice you have to start pushing. And again, when you push on these things, only bad things can happen. Ledge, separated file, things like that. So I want more efficient cutters. So after 2 times, I get rid of them. And I think that's their practice here as well. Twice, then they get rid of them.
Which company makes these race files?
Brasseler. So again, you saw this case yesterday. Again, nothing fancy. I'm sort of proud of it. Maybe that's the only molar I've ever done. You don't know. But again, we have to figure out the taper. Again, I don't want to stick an 04 taper file in that curved canal. So again, that's something we have to think about. So the old step back technique, the stainless steel era, the 1 millimeter shorter, 2 millimeters shorter, because you heard Martin talk about there's no room for the dentin to go anywhere. So that's why we're sort of stepping back. So stainless steel era really didn't permit us to get to these large apical sizes efficiently. Most of you are too young to sort of deal with these. I don't know how many of you use stainless steel step back. I know some of us have, certainly. But again, this is the stainless steel era. And if you were, sorry about the slide, if you were lucky, maybe you produced that, maybe that. But the big, strong guys in my class, this is what they'll end up with, right? Because they don't really appreciate the curve, so I'm going to get to the working length no matter what. So with the stainless steel file, this working length might be the same as that working length. But that we all know is wrong. So again, very difficult to treat some of these with stainless steel files to large apical sizes. So he mentioned this yesterday. This whole technique, BioErase, the whole technique sort of does the crown down for us without thinking about it, but we want to start taking small little bites, small little chunks of the tooth, coronal, middle, apical. It's for tooth safety in terms of fracturing teeth, but also the safety of the file. So that's why, again, little bites, little chunks, really important concept to get. We're not forcing these things all the way to the apex. Again, we're taking small little chunks out of the tooth or the canal.
How do you know when to stop? You know what I mean, when it's in your hand?
Great question. Basically, I'm going to give you a formula that says, okay, I'm going to sort of do, we can call it PECs, insertions, whatever you want. But really the way I teach it, the way Brasseler told me to teach it, the way he has taught me, you do 4 taps, 1, 2, 3, 4. You want to use as much force as it takes to move that file, maybe a millimeter each time. So it's not very much force at all. So it's tap, 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 you're done with that file. And the next file then should go to length or even farther apically. So again, we'll talk a little bit more when I show the technique. But again, this is the beautiful part. You can turn your brains off now because it's really a technician doing the work. It's all technical stuff now. And again, when I can do this stuff, you all can do it because it's a mindless, I don't know, did we talk about, who was yelling at me about mindless yesterday? Anyway, because I used the term mindless. That was you. Roy, were you? No,
I was never good.
Okay. But I call it HUP proof. You know, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And again, now my students can do it. And again, they have no experience. They come in and do nice root canals in an hour and a half. Unheard of,
I'm jealous.
right? So again, it's just dealing with different tapers, cutting different parts of the canal. And again, we can get these large apical sizes now because of technology. Nickel titanium, rotary instrumentation has allowed us to do this. Again, I don't think he showed this yesterday, but you know, just taking very small bites, very safe for the instrument, very safe for the tooth. This is an O2 taper you would think is safe, but you get this total engagement all the way along, or an O8 file like the greater taper files, or if you're using Schilder's method, you know, trying to get these big tapers, you know, what happens when I try to put a large taper file in a tooth? Do we get micro cracks? We do. Now, in all fairness, we don't know, all systems will cause micro cracks. So I'm talking about BioRace, there's micro cracks. Wave 1, there's micro cracks. ProTaper, we don't know what the long-term effects of these are, because a lot of the studies are done on dry teeth, and you see how dry teeth are. We don't know, but it could be a problem. So again, in all fairness, all these systems will cause this problem. And here's just, again, but this is a dry tooth, so is it applicable? Maybe, I don't know. But if we're doing stuff like this, what's the long-term effect, if you will? We don't know. So again, taking those little small bites might protect the tooth from this happening, maybe. This is what reciprocal files, wave 1, so it's just going back and forth. Look at where the debris comes out. So reciprocation actually pushes sludge out the apex. So post-operatively, that could be a problem. And then it'll show rotary actually pulls stuff back out of the tooth. You saw when he was wiping the stuff off of his file yesterday, he's pulling that out of the tooth. So again, there is a difference. He talked about this yesterday, so I won't spend too much time. We're worried about cyclic fatigue or torsional fatigue. So cyclic fatigue is like holding a coat hanger in one spot and just keep doing this. So to avoid files separating from that, you have to keep the file moving, not spinning, but moving it up and down in the canal. If you keep it in one spot, guess what's going to happen? It's going to break. Tip lock occurs when it catches and the file starts to unwind. So again, we use a sharp file at a higher speed. Again, what's ProTaper is still 300 RPM. Whoever uses ProTaper. We're at 600 RPM, or he's using 900 RPM. Very fast, sharp. Again, I don't want to spend too much time because he talked about this yesterday. This is applicable for everything that we teach. Higher speed, sharper instruments, and keeping the file moving, not stationary in the tooth. The handpieces that you'll all be using, they're set at 600 RPMs. Again, this thing, you should hold it, should almost fall out of your hand when you use it. Again, basically you're guiding the file, that's all you're doing. Very little pressure. Again, the file does all the work. Because the minute you start pushing on these things, bad things happen. Bad things. So again, it's a finesse sport. Everything's finesse now. So RACE stands for reamers with alternating cutting edges. You know, we got fancy and put bio in front of it. Okay, same file, same instrument. The interesting aspect is there's a lot of room for dentinal debris to collect. So that's a good thing. We want to pull the debris out. We don't want to push it into the spaces of the canal. But remember, to make these efficient, when we take them out, we still have to wipe the flutes, make sure it's like, men, we're shaving. If our razor's full of gunk, do we get a good shave? Probably not. So keeping these things clean of debris keeps it an efficient cutter. And you could test it out during the week. We have enough files. Try to put a dirty file, a file that's full of debris and try to use it. You'll have to push and push and push. So keeping things clean is very important. And again, this is why it's very efficient. Triangular blank, very sharp instrument. Totally different than profile. The Swiss are big on electropolishing. There is a study that says that you might get fewer separated files because they electropolish things. Whoops, we'll go back. Possibly. Resistant to corrosion, that's the study. But is that making the file better? Maybe. It's a nice touch. And this is the slide, how many times you can use before it fractures. So number of molars, 4, number of canals. So again, our recommendation is if you really want to use them for, you could probably use them for 4 molars, probably. But again, they become less and less efficient.
So maybe like 4 premolars and like 2 molars.
Yeah, again, but, it depends where you practice and things like that. When I was here, we're getting $1,500 for a molar. What did I care if I had to, I would use a new pack on every patient, probably. If you're practicing somewhere where we're only getting, $500 for a molar, you might worry about, we were talking about overhead at lunch, right? Maybe that's an issue. We get a lot of people from overseas that, people from Brazil, they don't get very much for a root canal, but yet they're having to pay a lot for the instruments and things like that. So they're more attuned to things like that. Americans, you practice in California, Los Angeles, what are you getting for a molar? $2,000. So what do I care if I'm spending $50 for? So it's all a matter of where you practice in general, I think. Maryland, they probably get a lot, I'm sure, for root canals.
800.
Yeah.
That's not much.
Salt Lake, we get probably $750 or something, so it's not, but Philadelphia, they get a lot. New York, I'm sure they get a lot, so. So this is the setup. Again, he went through this a little bit yesterday. We'll talk a bit about it right now. The BR0, we have the word for it, bro. You want to call it the bro, that's fine. But again, 2508 taper, orifice opener, that's why it's a BR0. It does not go to length. Again, it's just used to open the orifice. We talked about using Gates Glidden yesterday. Available if you want, but again, it's redundant. I don't really have Gates in the office anymore. That's the first file you'll use. Again, you ask how deep does it go? How far does it go? This particular file will go to where you feel resistance. When it starts feeling tight, then I stop using it. I might use it more in a brushing stroke then. Again, I want to change that orifice so I get more straight line access, and that's all. I don't force it. If it goes 4 millimeters, fine. If it goes 6 millimeters, fine. It may only go 2 millimeters. That's all.
Excuse me. Some of endodontist takes the Gates Glidden and cuts the sharp end and they use it.
Some of them do that because there's a whole procedure, and a lot of them do that to retrieve broken instruments. So they're cutting the sharp, a Gates Glidden, they basically remove the sharp tip, and then they use it to get down to a broken instrument if it's relatively straight. Then you have this wide area that you can see under a microscope where that instrument is. They call it staging. So that's what, at least in my thinking, that's, Gary Carr in California was a big proponent of cutting the gates going down to the separated instrument, then you can use ultrasonics
To remove it.
to remove it.
You cannot use it to prepare light.
I wouldn't. I showed you that slide yesterday on how you can perforate that concavity on the mesial root. So gates, I think, are pretty dangerous, especially with the technology we have nowadays. If you're going to use a Gates Glidden burr, I would use it the first 2 millimeters of the canal, and that's it. That's all I would use it. Again, trying to get all the way to the apex or mid-root with the gates, I think it's disastrous.
Which number you are going to use? Like 4?
When I was using them, I was using 2, 3, and 4. Ones are a little small because they can break. 2, 3, and 4 I would use, but again, first 2 millimeters of the canal, that's it.
And they bend so easily, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I mean, you can't do a lot with them, especially with the stuff we have nowadays. Again, some of, the older guys here, it was very helpful initially, but now it's just something extra, and I don't need extra in my life. So the BR1, 2, and 3 are our next files. So again, we've talked about building your own systems. The only file that you can't buy outside of Brasseler is this one, but you can get a 1506 from people, right? So what's the difference going to be between that taper? Probably not much. So again, we don't necessarily push Brasseler stuff. Again, I use this because I love it. It's simple. It's the simplest thing I've used in my practice lifetime. But you can get a 1506 from Cybron and Dentsply. BR2 is a 2504. 2506 for the BR3. Now that's the one he talked about a little bit yesterday. That's the only really different taper here, and I'll tell you what the reason is for that. It's basically a blending file. It's going to blend, you've got a 05, 04, it's going to make a nice smooth taper. So that's really the only purpose for that file. So it really smooths your preparation out at that point. And I'll talk a little bit more about the BR3 in a second.
and then all these go to length.
After the BR0, they all go to length, yes. And then the 3504, 4004. And that gets you through a lot of the canals. Mesials of lower molars, facials of upper molars, bicuspids. When we have larger canals, we have, well, I'll talk about that in a second. So this is the basic setup, and this is what you saw him use yesterday. And you can buy these separately. Again, when I order them for my practice and for the students, I order the setup, and they come in one pack. We put them in a sponge and use them that way.
How much is a pack?
Retail, probably $50 some. Basically the same price as what Pro Taper would cost for a pack. And I mean, that's the thing. They're price-wise, it's really not much difference.
So for these files, do we have to use the handpiece of the BioRace too, right?
Mm-mm.
Oh, no?
Because he's using a different handpiece. You just have to get the settings right. So 600 RPMs, and then there's a recommended torque setting that you can set torque on your handpieces. And I think he gave you all the wrong number. It's 600 RPMs and 2.2 Newton centimeters.
But when we talk to the reps, can we,
They can tell you that too.
okay.
So again, your experience with these, that'll change your torque level. Torque's basically an auto reverse. So if you start pushing on them, it'll sort of auto reverse out. I don't even use torque. So I shut mine off because I have enough experience that I know that I'm not going to push too hard on these things.
The torque is more for like safety? That you
Torque's for safety.
You
Yeah.
don't go into that?
Yeah, again, I don't use these in a long enough spurt that I can tell the difference between torque and no torque. So I just turn mine off. He uses some torque, and that's fine, but he's operating at 1,000 RPMs, so he's in a little different area than I am. So
I thought you said that we had to use from 900 and up for these.
so I said for the
The growth.
Scout files, 900 RPMs.
Oh, okay, but these,
These are 600. And again, Martin's using these at 900, but because he's more experienced. So for you guys, I want you to use 600 RPMs. The Scout Files, 900 RPMs. So you're right partially. I'll give you partial credit. How's that sound?
Yeah, sounds good.
You can use the Pathfinder, that supplies.
You can use a path file. That's right. I think path files have been pretty good. I've used those. They're a little dull compared to Scout Files, but they seem to do a pretty good job too. What's the other? There's another generation. It's not path file. What's the other? Dentsply has another sort of Scout file out now too, and I forget the name of that people seem to like, and that's fine. Again, personally, if you've used ProTaper, the SX file, the SX is their orifice shaper. I really like that one because it's not as, you'll figure out that this is a very stiff file. The SX file has a very softer tip. So if I get that little catch in a canal, I sort of like that. So, I mean, if I had my druthers, I would probably put the SX file here. Should I stop recording now? But I like the SX file from Dentsply because it's got a little flexible tip on it. This is very stiff. You'll see
SX is the same like.
same orifice opener, same taper, everything
From Dentsply.
from Dentsply.
Is there a relationship between speed and torque?
There is probably. I couldn't even comment on that. So I wouldn't know what to say about it, honestly. But I'm sure that there is. I'll give you a homework assignment tonight. You can come back and tell us about it, or maybe I'll look it up.
You can ask one of your graduate students.
Yeah, but I don't. But see, again, I've been doing enough of these that I don't really give it much thought. 'Cause again, a torque really is an auto reverse mechanism, a safety feature. Yeah, I don't think it provides. We could talk about high-speed handpieces and torque and things like that, but the relationship for rotary instrumentation really isn't the same. Speed is speed is speed. The torque basically is going to say, okay, you're pushing too hard. It's going to auto-reverse out.
The handpieces that you show often beep before they want to.
That's right.
So you
That's
get a
right.
warning to back up.
That's right. Yeah, so I think it's more of a safety mechanism for these things rather than a helpful, efficient way to instrument teeth. That's my impression of it, but I don't know really much about that.
So we should probably start with a torque of 2.2.
2.2, right.
I have just a question. When we say torque, it's like dynamometric key. That's when we fix torque as 2x2, and after that we do more torque. Is going to stop alone.
Right.
This is one.
That's right, yeah. And you can adjust it to wherever, initially where you're comfortable with. And like I say, when you do enough of these, again, I turn mine off. I don't even have torque set.
So the torque, the objective of the torque is to avoid fracture of the file.
Of the file, yes, yeah. That's my interpretation of why you use it. Again, I don't think it makes it more efficient or anything. I think it's a safety feature.
Do you prefer SX better than BR0?
Yes, I do. But see, then again, I'm lazy, so I don't bother to order the SX file. I just want really everything. So if I told my staff I want SX file, and then I want the 1506 file from Cybron, so then it gets too complicated. So I sort of put up with the inconvenience of using the BR0. Again, you'll learn from me. I'm not very smart, and I get a little lazy. So again, that's why I use Scout Files, and I really like easy setups in my operatory. The easier and the fewer instruments, the more efficient I am. Again, we're all dentists, so we probably want to accumulate stuff, and operatories get crowded, and I think for endodontics, it just makes me less efficient.
Can you tell me when you use your Scout Files and what size they are?
And I'll get to that. Yes. So this is the basic setup. You use this in a lot of these cases, but palatal canals, distal canals will need something a little larger. Again, we have these technique cards that you'll get. The basic procedure, estimated working length, you'll hear me talk about using an 8 file. I don't have 6s in my office. I've never used 6s. I will put an apex locator on a number 8 file. I'll get my working length, estimated working length. I'll make sure that that goes, I'll be able to get a size 15 to that working length. This is all apex locator, okay? Again, I don't take as many radiographs as Martin does, and I'll show you, we have a way of demonstrating how an apex locator works back here. So I'll show you how to do that, and I'll show you what numbers and lines, we were talking about all that today, what we need to accomplish with those things. BR0 is our first file, and again, it's just working in the orifice. This diagram will then show a 15 file again to recapitulate. I don't do that. But this diagram will, if, you know, it's perfectly okay to go back in with this 15 file. I have my working length from the apex locator. I've used my BR0. I trust this enough that I don't have to do this step. It's perfectly okay that you guys do that. When you become more comfortable with what you're doing, again, I don't do this step anymore. So
You do irrigation or no?
irrigation, right now, irrigation is going to be just in the chamber. I'm working in a puddle of sodium hypochlorite. No EDTA, no RC prep. Sodium hypochlorite has been shown to be the best lubricant, the best disinfectant. You know, we used to think RC prep would provide more lubrication. That's been shown not to really be true. And again, it clogs up all these files. Again, we want these flutes to remain clean of debris, so we don't really use that stuff. EDTA we use at the very end for our final rinses. So sodium hypochlorite in a puddle, because again, we haven't instrumented enough to provide room to get to the apex yet. So it's just working in a puddle. BR1 goes to length, or at least we hope it does. 99% of the time it goes to length. So it's in your handpiece, BR1, basically it's tap, 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 tap 4 times. After 4 times, it should get to length, and it does 90% of the time, okay? It will get to length, but it really won't clean to length just yet because it's an 05 taper. So the first file that actually cleans to the apex is the BR2. So I've used the BR1, tap, 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 tap 4 times, done. I've gone the length. BR2 is my next file. Again, it's the same thing. Tap, 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 tap 4 times. The BR2 will go to length. So now we've instrumented apex, coronal 2/3. So now we sort of have this disjointed canal, if you will. We've instrumented the apex, the coronal 2/3. Now the BR3 is basically going to blend everything together. So I ask my students this all the time, and we've talked about it here, you know, what is the difference with the BR3 in this whole setup?
Taper 0.6.
The taper is larger. It's a 0.6 taper. So again, this file is very stiff compared to an 04 taper. Again, when we have our setups in here, you can test it yourself. You know, you can hang, you know, he talked about a file hanging picture, but a BR3 can hang a picture on a wall. So when we have a curved canal, we have to be very careful with this file because it's very stiff. A lot of times this won't go to working length in a very curved canal because it's got a larger taper. So we have to maybe make some adjustments. We might have to do our insertion 2 cycles, meaning 1, 2, 3, 4, clean it 1, 2, 3, 4. So we might have to do 2 cycles with this particular instrument because it may not get to working length the first time because it's stiff. It's got an 06 taper.
But you do it 4 times as well.
Yeah, I mean, 4 is the number, you know, I think he uses 3. I think the video uses 3. I teach 4. You shouldn't have to really tap on or insert the file more than 4 times. You know, tap, 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 tap. Peck, 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 peck. Again, it's trying to press or advance this about 1 millimeter with each peck.
And you said that if it's curved, then you have to maybe do it 3 times, irrigate, and do it another 3 times.
Do it another 4 times, that's right. Because the BR3 is an 06 taper and is very stiff. So again, you have to be extra careful with this file. And when we use plastic blocks, which we will use in some of the plastic teeth, you'll feel this file actually grab, and it will, even on natural teeth, it will grab and pull you in.
So what can you use another file?
You could, but again, I like the efficiency of this because what happens next? You've gone from a 2506, this allows you to skip a size 30 file, so now I'm at a size 35. So the BR3 does a magical thing for us because of its taper, and we can figure out the math. It allows us to get to a size 35 file, and we skip a file, basically, because there's no size 30 tip file here, right? So that's what a BR3 does for us. Okay? And go ahead.
It's just going to relieve the pressure on the coronal tooth there.
That's right. And again, it's all about taking little small bites, and it relieves the pressure of the previous file. So that's all about taking these small bites, making it safe for the next file, and that's why you can replace this. But for our purposes right now, there's not really a need to do that.
BR4 is more flexible.
BR4 because it's a smaller taper, 04, and it's going to be flexible. And then again, you can finish with a BR5, which is a size 40. So that again is the basic setup, and nothing really changes. Again, you have to stop and take pause when you use the BR3 because it's an 06 taper.
But does it have to go to a working length?
Great question, because again, when you become more experienced, sometimes if I can't get this to go to working length, if I'm within 1 or 2 millimeters, I will take a chance and jump to this one, and usually it'll go to length then. The BR4 will go to length. So again, I don't force a BR3 because again, it'll separate pretty easily. So again, great question. Sometimes you can take that chance and do that. There's other little variations that I'll teach you when we start the hands-on. But for right now, again, the BR3 is very helpful, but you have to be careful using it, okay? Because I've seen some teeth that we've been working on that have some pretty severe curves. So again, when we get to those, we'll have to be real careful with that.
So you can, theoretically, you could finish with a BR4.
Yes.
With a thinner canal. Or
That's right.
BR5.
Because now we've made enough room for the irrigation, right? So theoretically, we've debrided, scaled the root canal, what we think is an appropriate size, and we've made room for irrigation. Okay? So you're exactly right.
So when we do the access cavity and we negotiate the canals with 8 or 10 files, did we irrigate before that or?
Yeah.
We did.
I mean, the minute I access a tooth, I will generally access underwater. I mean, I like to keep it cool and keep the smell down and things like that. As soon as, once before I put a file in the tooth, then I'll start irrigating with sodium hypochlorite. I become aseptic at that point.
And then when you use the apex locator, you just dry the coronal portion?
Yeah, and I don't air dry thing. I don't start blowing in the canals and things like that. I'll use a little cotton pellet or suction. Again, the chamber should be relatively dry. The canals can be wet.
Okay.
So, but again, I really want to be aseptic. Those air water lines that we use, guess what's in them? No matter how well your staff cleans, right, biofilms. So again, I don't blow air or water into my preps. I get real compulsive about that stuff. Students want to come in and just blow air water into these things. Just stop. Because again, you're probably blowing microbes in there. Is it a factor? I don't know, but why take the chance? And then I think it'll show exactly what this will look like. And again, this is what I tried to get him to show you guys yesterday, but this is where the flutes fill up. So again, the BR1 goes to length, but look at it, it's not really cutting anything. The BR2 starts cutting to length.